Captain Frank Miller stood at the cracked window of what used to be the Colony Epsilon Command Center. 3 weeks until Christmas back on Earth, but here, 30 light-years from home, the holiday seemed like a distant dream. The red dust of this world swirled outside, mixing with smoke from buildings still burning after the last Cracks attack. "Sir, the latest reports," Lieutenant Susan Wright said, handing him a tablet. Her face was streaked with dirt, her uniform torn at the shoulder. Like everyone else, she hadn't slept properly in days. Frank took the tablet without a word. The numbers told the same story they had yesterday, and the day before that. 275 colonists still alive. Over half of them children. Food supplies for maybe 2 more weeks. Medical supplies running even lower. "The Cracks have broken through the eastern line," Susan added quietly. "They'll reach the civilian shelters by tomorrow unless we can push them back." Frank nodded. The Cracks had appeared in orbit 3 weeks ago without warning. The alien ships had blocked all outgoing messages before anyone could call for help. Then they had started landing troops. "Get everyone who can still hold a gun," Frank ordered. "We'll set up a new line here." He pointed to a spot on the digital map. It was closer to the civilian bunkers than he liked, but they had no choice. Susan left to gather their remaining fighters. Frank looked back out the window at the colony they had worked so hard to build. New Portland, they had named it, full of hope for a fresh start. Now most of it lay in ruins. He made his way down to the main shelter where most of the colonists huddled. The air was stale, filled with the smell of too many scared people packed too close together. As he entered, faces turned to him, some hopeful, most just tired. "Captain Miller," a small voice called out. 10-year-old Amy Donovan pushed through the crowd. Her father, Sergeant Joe Donovan, stood nearby, his arm in a makeshift sling. "Is help coming?" Frank crouched down to her level. Amy had lost her mother in the first attack. "We're doing everything we can," he said, the words feeling hollow in his mouth. "I told everyone not to worry," Amy said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Santa will come. He always does when you need him most." Frank felt something catch in his throat. He patted her shoulder gently. That's good thinking, Amy." He stood up and met Joe's eyes over his daughter's head. The sergeant gave a small, sad smile and shrugged his good shoulder. "Santa, huh?" Joe said later, as they checked the weapons they had left. "Amy's been telling all the kids that Santa will bring help instead of toys this year." "Kids need something to believe in," Frank replied. He picked up a rifle, checking the charge. Only half power. They were running out of everything. "She gets it from her mother," Joe said quietly. "Catherine always made such a big deal about Christmas. Even out here, she'd find a way to make it special." Frank clapped a hand on his friend's shoulder. "We'll get through this." But as night fell and he returned to the command center, Frank knew they were running out of time. The Cracks weren't like humans. They didn't want to talk, didn't seem interested in anything but wiping out the colony. Their bodies were tall and spindly, with gray skin that seemed to shift color slightly in different lights. They carried weapons that fired bursts of energy that could melt through the colony's walls. Officer Lisa Martinez was on duty at the communication station. "Still nothing but static, sir," she reported. "The Cracks jammers are too strong. No way to call for help." "Keep trying," Frank ordered. Earth had to know something was wrong eventually. Ships would come. The question was whether anyone would still be alive when they got here. As Lisa returned to her work, Frank studied the tactical display. Red dots showed Cracks' positions surrounding the colony center. Their own defenses were shown in blue, a shrinking circle around the remaining buildings and underground bunkers. "Sir," Lisa suddenly called out, "I'm picking up something on the long-range scanner." Frank rushed to her station. "Reinforcements?" "I don't think so," she said, adjusting controls. "It's too small to be a ship, moving too slowly to be a missile." She looked up at him, confused. "But it's coming through the atmosphere under control. Something's guiding it." "Cracks drop pod?" Frank suggested, though it didn't match any Cracks landing craft they'd seen so far. "Sir, there's something else," Lisa said, her voice strange. "I'm picking up a signal. It's breaking through the Cracks jamming somehow." "Put it on speaker," Frank ordered. A sound filled the command center, the clear, unmistakable jingling of bells. "What is that?" Frank demanded. "Some kind of psychological warfare?" "I don't know, sir, but it's getting stronger," Lisa replied. Her screen showed the unknown object continuing its descent toward the colony. "Alert all defense teams," Frank ordered. "We may have an unknown craft about to land." Private Daniel Powell was on guard duty at the north edge of their defensive line when he saw it, a flash of red against the night sky. At first he thought it was a crack's flare, but it moved wrong, descending in a controlled path directly toward the colony center. "Unidentified object approaching from the north," he radioed in. "Can you make out what it is?" Frank's voice came back over the comm. "Negative, sir, it's—" Daniel stopped as something impossible happened. Snow, actual snow, began to fall around his position, just around him, nowhere else. This planet didn't have snow. It barely had rain. The red object grew larger, and Daniel raised his rifle. Through his scope, he could make out something that looked like, but it couldn't be. "Sir," he said into his comm, his voice shaking. "You're not going to believe this." A Cracks patrol rounded the corner ahead, their weapons raised. Daniel ducked behind cover, ready for a firefight. But before either side could fire, the red object dropped directly between them. The Cracks fired, their energy weapons lighting, up the night. But the shot seemed to curve around the red figure that now stood in the street. "Ho ho ho!" A deep voice boomed out. The Cracks soldiers dropped to the ground one by one, not dead but peacefully asleep, their weapons falling from limp hands. And there, brushing snow from his red coat, stood a large man with a white beard, a red hat, and a large sack slung over his shoulder. He looked directly at Daniel's hiding spot and winked. "Merry Christmas, son," he said. "I believe Captain Miller is expecting me." Daniel couldn't move, couldn't speak. The man in red smiled. "Don't worry," he said. "I know the way." He began walking calmly toward the colony center, leaving footprints in impossible snow, while overhead, more bells jingled in the night. Captain Frank Miller rushed to the north perimeter with a squad of 6 soldiers. The radio message from Private Daniel Powell had been confusing at best, impossible at worst. "What do you mean, Santa Claus?" Frank had demanded over the comm. Just come see, sir," Daniel had replied, his voice shaking. Frank's team moved carefully through the ruined streets. The ever-present red dust of Colony Epsilon swirled around their boots. But as they approached Daniel's position, the dust gave way to something else, white flakes drifting down from the sky. "Is that snow?" Lieutenant Susan Wright asked beside him, reaching out to catch a flake on her glove. Frank didn't answer. He couldn't, because walking toward them, stepping casually over the bodies of unconscious Crack soldiers, was a large man in a red coat trimmed with white fur. His beard was full and white, and a red hat sat on his head. Over his shoulder he carried a large sack. "Weapons ready," Frank ordered quietly, raising his own rifle. "But hold fire until my command." The man in red stopped about 10 feet away and smiled broadly. "Frank Miller, my goodness, look at you, a captain now." He laughed, a deep rumbling sound. "Though I must say you were cleaner the last time I saw you, when you were 8 and trying so hard to stay awake to catch me leaving presents under your tree." Frank felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. How could this stranger know about that? He had indeed tried to catch Santa in the act one Christmas, setting up a makeshift alarm system with string and bells. He had fallen asleep anyway. "Identify yourself," Frank demanded, keeping his rifle aimed at the man's chest. "You know who I am," the man replied, his eyes twinkling. "Though I admit, I don't usually make personal appearances like this. The rules are a bit different this far from Earth." He looked at the soldiers flanking Frank. "And these children need me." "Sir," Susan whispered, "this has to be some kind of trick. The Cracks must be—" A loud rumble cut her off as a Cracks dropship roared overhead, its searchlights sweeping the area. Everyone tensed, ready to dive for cover, but the man in red simply looked up and waved his hand. The dropship's engines sputtered and died. Instead of crashing, it glided gently to the ground some distance away. "Now then," the man said, hefting his sack. "I believe we should get these supplies to your people. They've been very good this year, all things considered." Frank kept his weapon raised. "You expect me to believe you're actually Santa Claus?" "I've been called many things over the centuries," the man replied. "St. Nicholas, Father Christmas, Kris Kringle. What I'm called isn't important. What matters is what I represent." He gestured to the unconscious crack soldiers. "And right. Now what these people need isn't just hope. They need help." Frank hesitated, then slowly lowered his weapon. "If you make any sudden moves—" "I would never," the man said, looking genuinely hurt by the suggestion. "Now, shall we go? I've brought medicine, food, and a few other things that might help with your cracks problem." Back at the command center, Officer Lisa Martinez couldn't believe her eyes as Frank returned with the strange visitor. The man, who introduced himself simply as Nicholas, opened his sack and began pulling out supplies, medical kits, food packages, and strange devices, unlike anything they had seen before. "How is this possible?" Lisa whispered to Frank. "That bag can't possibly hold all this. If I told you about quantum folding and dimensional pockets, would it help?" Nicholas asked with a smile as he handed a medical kit to a stunned colony. "Doctor. Or would you rather just accept that sometimes the universe has more magic in it than we usually see?" Frank watched as Nicholas pulled out container after container of supplies. "Why are you helping us?" Nicholas paused, his expression growing serious. "Because you asked, or rather she did." He nodded toward the door where Amy Donovan stood watching with wide eyes. "Santa," she whispered. "You really came?" "I always come when I'm needed most," Nicholas replied gently. "Your mother told you that, didn't she?" Amy nodded, tears filling her eyes. "She said you bring what people need, not just what they want." And she was right. Nicholas turned back to Frank. "The cracks aren't evil, Captain. They're desperate. Their world is dying. They came here for resources, not realizing this colony was more than just a mining operation. They've killed dozens of our people," Frank said harshly. "And you've killed dozens of theirs," Nicholas replied. "War is like that, but it doesn't have to continue." He reached into his bag and pulled out a strange globe-like device that glowed with soft blue light. "This will help us communicate with them properly. Their language is more complex than your translators can handle." "Communicate?" Susan asked. "They've shown no interest in talking." "That's because neither side understands what the other is truly saying." Nicholas placed the globe on the table. "Trust me, I've had experience with communication barriers. Try delivering presents to every culture on Earth for a few centuries, and you learn a thing or two about translation." As Nicholas continued unpacking supplies, word spread through the colony. People emerged from the shelters, cautious at first, then with growing wonder as they saw the man in red coat. Sergeant Joe Donovan approached, his arm still in its sling. "I don't understand," he said, watching Amy helping Nicholas organize supplies. "How is this possible?" "Does it matter?" Frank asked. "Whatever or whoever he is, he's helping." Joe watched his daughter laugh for the first time since her mother died. "No, I suppose it doesn't." Later that night, Nicholas asked for space in the abandoned factory at the edge of the colony's safe zone. "I'll need to set up shop," he explained. "We have work to do." "What kind of work?" Frank asked. Nicholas smiled, his eyes twinkling again. "Why, making gifts, of course. It's almost Christmas." "Gifts?" Frank couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. "We're in the middle of a war zone." "Exactly," Nicholas replied. "And sometimes the right gift can change everything." He looked toward the sky where crack ships still orbited, even for those who think they've forgotten how to receive them. As Nicholas headed toward the factory, Private Daniel Powell approached Frank. "Sir, you're not going to believe this. The crack soldiers that were unconscious? They're awake, but different." "Different? How?" Frank asked. "They're happy, sir. One of them is singing what sounds like Christmas carols. They're asking to help repair the colony's systems." Daniel shook his head in disbelief. What's happening? Frank looked toward where Nicholas was walking, snow still falling gently just around him despite the planet's warm climate. I'm not sure, Frank said quietly, but I think we might be witnessing a miracle. The abandoned factory at the edge of Colony Epsilon buzzed with activity. Nicholas had turned it into what he called his workshop, and within a day, it had become the most lively place in the colony. Children who had been hiding in bunkers now gathered there, helping the man in the red coat with various projects. Lieutenant Susan Wright stood watch, assigned by Captain Frank Miller to keep an eye on their strange visitor. She still didn't trust Nicholas despite the help he had provided, but what she saw in the workshop was hard to explain. He's making toys, she reported to Frank when she returned to the command center. But also, other things. Devices I've never seen before. Frank looked up from the colony defense plans. Weapons? Not exactly, Susan said, showing him the footage she had recorded. They don't seem designed to kill, more like disable. On the screen, Nicholas worked with a group of children, showing them how to assemble small globe-like objects that glowed with soft blue light. Nearby, other children painted what looked like ordinary toys, dolls, model ships, and small figurines. What is he planning? Frank wondered aloud. I asked him, Susan replied. He said he's making Christmas happen, and that sometimes the best defense is a gift freely given. Frank rubbed his tired eyes. 3 more crack soldiers had been found wandering near the colony perimeter, all of them acting strangely cheerful and non-aggressive. They now sat in the makeshift holding area, helping to repair damaged colony equipment. Sir, called Officer Lisa Martinez from her communication station. Something strange is happening with the Cracks forces. Frank moved to her station. The tactical display showed the Cracks' positions around the colony. Many of their forward bases now showed as inactive. What happened to them? Frank asked. Unknown, sir, Lisa replied. They just went silent overnight. No distress calls, no signs of battle. They're just not responding anymore. Frank thought for a moment. Nicholas, he said finally. It has to be. As if summoned by his name, Nicholas appeared at the door of the command center, his red coat dusty from work in the factory. With him was Amy Donovan holding one of the glowing blue globes. Captain, Nicholas greeted him warmly. I believe you've noticed some changes in our friends outside? What did you do to them? Frank demanded. I gave them gifts, Nicholas replied simply. Small reminders of their own childhoods, their own festivals. The Cracks have festivals? Susan asked, surprised. Every culture does, Nicholas said. Even the Cracks. They call it the time of renewal. Not unlike your Christmas, actually. A time when they put aside conflict and remember what matters most. He looked sad for a moment. They've forgotten. Much of it in recent generations focused too much on survival and expansion. So you're, what? Reminding them? Frank couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Sometimes we all need reminders of who we really are, Nicholas replied. Now I need your help with something. He turned to Lisa at the communications station. Can you boost a signal to reach their main ship? We've been trying to contact them for weeks, Lisa said. Their jammers block everything we send. Nicholas smiled and pulled a small device from his pocket. Not anymore, they don't. I took care of those last night. Lisa looked to Frank, who nodded. She took the device from Nicholas and connected it to her console. The screens flickered, then stabilized, showing clear communication channels. It worked, she said, amazed. We have a direct line to the Cracks command ship. Excellent, Nicholas said. Now let's invite them to our Christmas party. Our what? Frank asked. Nicholas gestured to Amy, who held up her glowing globe. We're going to show them what Christmas really means. It's not just about presents, it's about peace, goodwill, and new beginnings. Frank shook his head. They won't come. And if they did, they'd just attack us. Perhaps, Nicholas conceded. But I think they'll be curious enough to listen, especially when they realize what's happening to their troops on the ground. That evening, Frank found Nicholas sitting with a group of crack soldiers in the holding area. The aliens looked different somehow. Their usually gray skin had taken on a slight blue tint, and their large eyes seemed more expressive. Captain Miller, one of the cracks, said in surprisingly good English, "This human explains your Christmas. It is familiar." Frank looked at Nicholas, who smiled. "Grell here was telling me about his family back on Crax's Prime. He has 3 younglings who would be celebrating the renewal right now." "The war," Grell began. "It was not our first choice. Our world dies. We need resources. We could have shared," Frank said, the words bitter in his mouth as he thought of the colonists who had died. "Yes," Grell agreed, surprising Frank. "But fear led us both to weapons first." Nicholas stood up. "Which is why we need to show them all something better." He put a hand on Frank's shoulder. "The globe Amy was holding. We've made hundreds like. Each contains a little bit of Christmas spirit, you might say." "What do they do?" Frank asked. "They project memories," Nicholas explained. "Happy memories of peace and celebration. When activated, they'll show the cracks their own festivals, their own traditions of peace. Remind them of what they're fighting for. Not just survival, but a life worth living." Frank looked skeptical. "And you think that will stop them from attacking us?" "It's already working," Nicholas pointed out. "Your sensors show that almost a third of their ground forces have ceased hostile actions. The ones who've experienced the globes remember what matters most." At that moment, Amy ran into the holding area, her father close behind her. "Nicholas, Nicholas, they answered." Lisa Martinez arrived seconds later. "Sir, the Crack's command ship is responding to our transmission. They're asking to speak with the human in red." Nicholas smiled. "Wonderful. Let's not keep them waiting." He turned to Frank. "The hard part comes next, Captain. Are you ready to offer peace to those who've been your enemies?" Frank thought of the colonies and lives lost in the fighting. "I don't know if I can forgive what they've done." "Forgiveness isn't something you do for others," Nicholas said gently. "It's what you do for yourself. It's how you move forward." He looked around at the small group gathering, humans and cracks together, united in curiosity about what would happen next. "Besides," Nicholas continued, "Christmas has always been about unlikely miracles. A child born in a manger, a star guiding wise men, peace on a battlefield." He winked at Amy. "A man in a red suit bringing gifts to all the good girls and boys, no matter what planet they're from." As they walked back to the command center, the first message from the Crack's commander appeared on the main screen. "Who are you, human in red, who turns our warriors into singers of old songs?" Nicholas smiled. "And that," he said, "is how peace begins. With a simple question and the chance for a new story." Nicholas stood before the large screen in the colony command center, facing the image of the Crack's supreme commander. The alien leader looked different from the soldiers they had captured. His gray skin had patterns of dark blue, and he wore a metal headpiece with glowing symbols. "I am Nicholas," the man in the red coat said simply. "Some call me Santa Claus." The Crack's commander's large eyes narrowed. "What trickery is this? What weapon turns my warriors into singing fools who speak of peace?" Captain Frank Miller watched from nearby, tense and ready for trouble. Lieutenant Susan Wright stood beside him, her hand resting on her weapon. Around them, the command staff held their breath. "No trickery, no weapon," Nicholas replied with a gentle smile. "Just a reminder of who your people truly are, of the festival of renewal that your ancestors celebrated for thousands of years." The commander's expression changed slightly. "How do you know of the renewal? Our records of those times are kept secret. I know all the festivals of all the children of all worlds," Nicholas said. "It's my job to know." Frank stepped forward. "Commander, your soldiers who've experienced Nicholas's gifts are fine. They remember your traditions. They talk about your world, about families waiting for them." The Cracks was silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke again. "Our world is dying. We need the resources of this planet. And we are willing to share," Frank said, surprising himself. He looked at Nicholas, who nodded encouragingly. but not if you try to take everything by force. You would share? After we attacked you? The commander seemed confused. It is the season of giving, Nicholas explained. Of goodwill. The humans call it Christmas, Officer Lisa Martinez whispered to Frank. Sir, 3 crack ships are entering the atmosphere, smaller than their usual attack vessels. Commander? Frank asked, tension returning to his voice. I am coming to meet this Nicholas, the crack's leader announced. To see these gifts for myself. I will bring guards. The screen went dark. Nicholas turned to Frank with a smile. Well, that went better than expected. They could be planning to attack, Susan pointed out. They're curious, Nicholas corrected her. And curiosity is the first step to understanding. He looked around the room. Now, we need to prepare a proper welcome. It's not every day you host a Christmas gathering for visitors from another world. The hours that followed, Nicholas directed a flurry of activity. The colony's central square was cleared of debris. The children hung small lights from the remaining structures. The blue globes Nicholas had created were arranged in patterns across the square. What if this doesn't work? Frank asked as they watched the preparations. What if they attack as soon as they land? Faith, Captain, Nicholas replied. Not just in me, but in the power of what Christmas truly represents. Peace, hope, goodwill. These are not just human concepts, they exist across the universe, called by different names but meaning the same thing. Frank wasn't convinced, but he found himself wanting to believe. He had seen too many strange things in the past few days to dismiss Nicholas's confidence. As the alien ships descended toward the designated landing area outside the colony, Frank ordered all colonists into defensive positions, hidden but ready. Nicholas, however, walked out alone to meet the ships, his red coat bright against the dusty landscape. He's going to get himself killed, Susan muttered, watching through binoculars. The Crack's ships landed in a triangle formation. Ramps lowered, and soldiers marched out, weapons ready. Last came a larger figure, the Supreme Commander himself, his headpiece gleaming in the planet's harsh sunlight. Nicholas stood waiting, empty-handed, smiling. The Crack soldiers formed a protective circle around their commander, weapons pointed at the man in red. You are the one called Nicholas? The commander asked, his voice carrying across the distance. I am, Nicholas replied. Welcome to Colony Epsilon, and Merry Christmas. The commander stepped forward. Show me these gifts that change minds. Nicholas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out one of the blue globes. It glowed more brightly as he held it up. This is not something I can force upon you. It must be accepted freely. The commander hesitated, then reached out one long gray hand. The moment his fingers touched the globe, a soft blue light enveloped him. The Crack soldiers raised their weapons, but the commander held up his other hand, stopping them. For several long moments, the commander stood frozen, the blue light pulsing around him. Then, slowly, the light faded. The commander looked different, somehow, his posture less rigid, his eyes wider. The renewal, he whispered. I had forgotten. We had all forgotten. Nicholas nodded. Your ancestors knew there was more to life than conquest. They celebrated renewal, growth, family, times of peace that made the hard times worthwhile. The commander turned to his soldiers. Lower your weapons. Frank couldn't believe what he was seeing. He gave the signal for the colonists to stand down as well. Captain, Nicholas called. I believe it's time for that Christmas party we discussed. What followed was unlike anything Colony Epsilon had seen before. In the central square, humans and Cracks gathered cautiously at first, then with growing ease. The children were the first to bridge the gap, offering the blue globes to the Crack soldiers who accepted them with growing wonder. What are they experiencing? Frank asked Nicholas, as they watched a group of Cracks swaying to music only they could hear. Their own memories, mostly, Nicholas explained. The globes helped them remember the celebrations of their youth, their parents, their own traditions. For some of the older ones, memories of the renewal they experienced as children. And that's enough to stop a war? Frank still couldn't quite believe it. Wars begin when we forget who we really are, Nicholas said. When we see others as enemies instead of fellow travelers, the globes simply remind them of their better selves. The Supreme Commander approached them, holding one of the blue globes carefully in his hands. Human Captain, he addressed Frank. We have much to discuss. Our need for resources remains, but perhaps there is a way forward that benefits us both. Frank nodded, still wary but willing to listen. We can start those discussions tomorrow. Yes, the commander agreed, looking up at the darkening sky. Tonight is for celebration, yes? For your Christmas and our remembered renewal. As night fell on Colony Epsilon, something impossible happened. Snow, real snow, began to fall across the entire colony. Children, both human and cracks, reached up in wonder to catch the flakes. How? Frank asked, looking at Nicholas. Nicholas winked. Some Christmas magic is universal, Captain, and sometimes all it takes is a little reminder of wonder to change everything. Morning came to Colony Epsilon with a strange quiet. The snow that had fallen during the night covered everything in white, softening the harsh landscape and hiding the scars of battle. Captain Frank Miller walked through the colony center watching, as humans and cracks worked side by side clearing paths and repairing buildings. It had been 3 days since the Supreme Commander's arrival, 3 days of careful talks and growing understanding. Frank still couldn't quite believe what had happened. A week ago they had been fighting for their lives. Now, plans were being made for shared mining operations and cultural exchanges. It's quite a sight, isn't it? Nicholas appeared beside him, his red coat bright against the white snow. I keep expecting to wake up and find this was all a dream, Frank admitted. Nicholas smiled. The best kind of magic often feels that way. They walked together toward the command center, where the final meeting with the Cracks leadership would take place. A formal peace agreement was ready to be signed. You know, Frank said, you never really explained who you are, or how you do the things you do. Would knowing change anything? Nicholas asked. Some mysteries are better left as mysteries, don't you think? Before Frank could answer, Amy Donovan ran up to them, her cheeks red from the cold. Nicholas, Father says the Earth ships have been spotted. They'll be here by tomorrow. Nicholas nodded, just in time. My work here is almost done. You're leaving? Amy asked, her smile fading. I'm always needed somewhere, Nicholas said gently. But I'm never really gone, not as long as people remember what Christmas truly means. Inside the command center, the mood was solemn but hopeful. The crack Supreme Commander stood with 3 of his advisors, reviewing the agreement one final time. This is acceptable, the commander announced at last. We will share the resources of this world, and in return, we will share our technology for sustainable extraction. Frank signed the document for Earth's colony, then passed it to the commander, who added his own mark. The room erupted in applause and cheers, colony staff and cracks alike celebrating the moment. There is one more thing, the commander said when the noise died down. He looked directly at Nicholas. Our scientists have studied your globes. We do not understand how they work. The technology is beyond our knowledge. Nicholas smiled. They're not technology in the way you think of it. They're simply reminders of what was already in your hearts. The commander considered this. Whatever they are, they saved both our peoples from a costly war. We are in your debt. No debt, Nicholas insisted. Consider it a gift. Later that day, as the celebrations continued throughout the colony, Frank found Nicholas in the factory that had served as his workshop. The man in red was packing up his few belongings, preparing to leave. Where will you go? Frank asked. Oh, there's always somewhere that needs a little Christmas spirit, Nicholas replied, especially in troubled times. Susan entered the workshop, her usual serious expression softened. Sir, you should see this. The Crack's ships are departing orbit, all except the commander's vessel. Returning home with news of peace instead of conquest, Nicholas said, looking pleased. A much better Christmas gift for their families than war trophies. Susan looked at Nicholas with newfound respect. I didn't believe at first about who you are. And now? Nicholas asked, eyes twinkling. I'm still not sure, Susan admitted. But whatever you are, you saved us all. As evening approached, word spread through the colony that Nicholas was leaving. People gathered in the central square, humans and the remaining cracks alike, to say goodbye. Amy pushed her way to the front, tears in her eyes. Do you have to go? You could stay here with us. Nicholas crouched down to her level. I have to go, Amy. There are other children who need help, other places where hope is in short supply. Will you come back next Christmas? She asked. I'm always where I'm needed most, Nicholas said. But you won't need me here next year. You have something better now. Peace and new friends. He glanced at the young cracks who had been playing with the colony children. The Supreme Commander approached with a small metal box in his hands. We have created something for you, he said, offering the box to Nicholas. A symbol of our gratitude. Nicholas opened it to find a small crystal statue, shaped like one of his blue globes but made with cracks artistry, glowing from within. When you look at this, the commander explained, it will remind you of what happened here, how you helped two peoples find common ground. Nicholas accepted the gift with a small bow. I will treasure it. As darkness fell, Nicholas walked to the edge of the colony, where a patch of undisturbed snow gleamed in the moonlight. The colonists followed at a respectful distance, watching in wonder. Nicholas turned to face them one last time. Remember, what brings you together is stronger than what drives you apart. That's the real magic of Christmas, finding light in the darkest times. He stepped into the fresh snow, and a strange wind began to swirl around him, picking up snowflakes until he was almost hidden from view. Goodbye, Amy called, waving frantically. Thank you for saving us. The swirling snow grew brighter, and for a moment, everyone thought they heard the jingling of bells. Then the light flashed brilliantly and was gone. When the snow settled, Nicholas had vanished. Only his footprints remained in the snow, leading nowhere. Frank stared at the empty space, a mixture of emotions running through him. Well, he said finally, that's one mission report Earth Command is never going to believe. 6 months later, Colony Epsilon had been transformed. New buildings stood where ruins had been. The shared mining operations with the cracks were producing abundant resources for both peoples. And though the planet's climate remained warm and dry most of the year, every December, for reasons scientists could never explain, snow fell for exactly 12 days. 10 years later, when Amy Donovan became the first human ambassador to the cracks' homeworld, she brought with her a special gift, one of the original blue globes that Nicholas had made. It was placed in the cracks' capital's central hall, a permanent reminder of how peace had begun. And on both worlds, when children asked about the strange human tradition that the cracks now also celebrated each year, they were told the story of how Santa Claus, who most believed was just a myth, had appeared in a war zone with a bag full of miracles and changed everything.